hard to do, to give closure to Gold Star parents as to how their child died, even if it's not in ideal circumstances. We know many, for example, Gold Star parents whose sons or daughters were killed when a tank rolled over and they drowned in an Iraqi lake, or when they were run over by went in a helicopter that shouldn't have launched and 19 people died because they went into combat to rescue somebody and they didn't think the other thing through. So we know those kinds of circumstances, or even suicide and other accidental death in combat operations. One dear friend, for example, was killed in Panama City, near Panama City, Florida, during a training operation when the helicopter pilot decided to go through bad weather in a training environment. He was a Marine Special Operations guy who'd been in 8 years, an E8, who was one of the most experienced MARSOC guys in the country. And he died that day because the pilot decided to press on, and who knows why. But the bottom line is, when you raise your hand as a to go into the military, since 1983, everyone has volunteered, no draft, to go into the service. You are going by nature into the potential of extreme danger, extreme sacrifice. And it's never the soldier who decides whether he'll go to combat, whether he'll have to pay that sacrifice in a training environment or whatever. But while Jeannie's thinking about the person of Todd and maybe a little bit about Kylie and everything, let me tell you the hardest part of our lives. And I'll let Jeannie tell you about, she was alone home when the Army came to tell us, so she'll tell you that story too. But from our perspective, what happened that day is very, very important to us, because it does show the character of the individual, our son. Todd was the executive officer of the 502nd Strike Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division. These are the band of brothers from World War II. The cohesion of that unit is incredible. He volunteered for that and was in the top 30 of 5,000 ROTC graduates that year. So he could get wherever he wanted to go. He chose the 101st because of that band of brothers, which he had watched on TV, on cable years ago. So he goes there, and he is disappointed, as Jeannie mentioned, when he's doing so well that the battalion commander wants him to become a company XO, and and get out of the line unit that he had trained for over a year to get ready to go to Afghanistan. So when they deploy, he goes in the advanced element as an SO. In July of 2010, 7 people in the battalion that he was a platoon leader when he was killed, 7 people in that artillery unit, none of whom were infantry, were killed in combat in the bloodiest battles over about a 3-week period of the war, not counting helicopter crashes and everything else. 7 individual soldiers in street-to-street type fighting. Not like Fallujah for the Marines or anything like that, but still very, very deadly. When the brigade commander came back and said, I need a volunteer or two to go and help that artillery battalion because they're in the thick of it, Todd's hand shot up, and he volunteered and went back into that. For 6 weeks, he trained, went into combat, trained, went into combat, trained, and the guys told us when they came back 8 months later after he was killed, we went to Fort Campbell to talk with many of them. They told us about how he changed their whole focus on what combat was and what civility was in combat, and how you have to pick your targets and how you have to make sure of humanity.
And one of the things that I will never forget that one of them told me is, and it was so true of all of them, which goes back to what I said earlier, is he was my best friend. Time after time after time they said that, and he had such a way of being, he was such a good leader that he ended up being everyone's best friend. They could all feel.
Yeah. As a quick aside there, I think one of the things that we skipped over in Todd's high school experience, his last year as a senior in high school, he became the quarterback of the football team and the captain of the baseball team at third base. In that sense, he was leading those teams, and I wrote later an article actually published in the Washington Post, which said Todd learned on the playing fields the challenges of leadership that would be fully tested on the battlefield. And I really believe that. Anyway, so as Todd goes out on one early morning combat patrol, it was about 3 in the morning in Afghanistan. He's leading his now, he's very comfortable. In fact, I talked to him on the phone 3 days before. He sent an email about wanting to get into the attaché program 2 days before. He had seen his daughter walk for the first time on Skype a week before. So he was going out into a combat environment, and it was his strategy, the company commander, battalion commander later told us, to go out there and wait for the Taliban, because they would sneak back to the villages at night to build bombs and do other things. So he was going to wipe these guys out.
Well, there was some kind of a shed or this building where they were storing ammunition to make these bombs.
Yeah. And since you brought that up, I'll say that there were, when they finally captured that building, 57 major IED bombs capable of blowing up Humvees, let alone killing individual soldiers on foot, were found there. So Todd's analysis of the situation was actually correct. But unfortunately, since the Taliban didn't care about Afghan human life, and they had planted many more bombs, IEDs, than the company thought, the battalion thought. And about 3:30 that morning, Todd had positioned his ambush patrol in the right environment, but the platoon sergeant said, "LT, come over and check out the machine gun. I want to make sure that you think it's in the right position." As Todd walked over there, he stopped for a minute and said, "Radio guy, stay there. I'll go and check this out." So he went in areas where 2 dogs and 2 sweepers had already been around. Within 20 seconds of his way between point A to point B to check out the machine gun, he stepped on a 155 millimeter round full of explosive devices and was killed instantly on foot. In that scenario, the reason the dogs had not detected it, and this is something that America has not understood, was that particular IED was manufactured by the Iranians, produced and had all plastic in it, so the metal detectors weren't picking out the stuff. The dogs were the new plastique and stuff were improvised made by the Iranians to be very difficult for the dogs to detect. It was brand new. It had been produced in Pakistan, which was an area allowed. This was all determined by later analysis. So Todd died leading that platoon in combat. We are very proud to say, confirmed the following summer in July of 2011, 9 months, 10 months after Todd was killed, not one other soldier in that battalion died in combat the rest of that whole year. Todd's death sparked a rethinking of what was really going on there. And they completely changed strategy. One thing they did was take all the villagers out of that area and built them in a temporary area, leveled the place with A-10s and other aircraft, and then rebuilt a wonderful village. They named that place Strong Point Weaver, and it was there for 3 years. In those 3 years, not one other American soldier was killed after they left that summer. However, as history tells us, if you take the Americans out, you create a vacuum. By the time it was realized, after our own decision to leave Afghanistan, it is now back to being a hotbed of problems, and American soldiers are this day at risk in that same area. But to tell you, from a point of view of parents, there is no worse feeling in the world than to have your son or daughter die before you. For my father, a World War II veteran still alive, Jeannie's dad died in 1980s. My father's still alive at 91 in California. He could not speak for 2 weeks after I called him to tell him the story. Thank heavens he came, though, to Arlington when Todd was buried on the 14th of October, 2010. And he went through that, because a grandfather fighting in 2 major wars to lose a grandson was unspeakable. So anyway, but at the same time, joining the military is something without which, if we had not had the people that we've had since the American Revolution willing to go to the fight, we don't have a country. And that's provable fact. It's nothing political. It's nothing in human nature beyond self-service versus country service. Deciding to put something ahead of self and being willing to go. And again, as I said before, it's not the soldier that chooses whether there's war or not. He'd rather not have war. But he's willing to go because that's what the government chooses him to do. And I hope, for the sake of our country, that that continues, and the young men and women that I know who are still enlisting and still coming back and still overused in combat environments these days, we are lucky that we still have that reservoir of people like Todd. Now, we go back to this, how Todd was as that day you got the word, or Emma beforehand, however you want to say it, Kylie?
Emma first. Todd and Emma went to high school together.
That's his wife?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. But they really didn't know each other. They ran in different circles. So, but Todd came home on R&R from Iraq. What year would that have been?
1984. I'm sorry, 2004.
2004. And he was home for a couple of weeks, and of course he wanted to spend most of the time partying and being with his friends. And he re-met this young lady, and then he went back to Iraq. And she just began to write him all the time, and they developed this email and telephone relationship. And when he came home from Iraq, she called us and said, "Can I go with you to meet him?" And that cemented what had become a very strong relationship. And they were together from that moment on. When Todd was a senior in college, he wanted to do a study abroad program. And he didn't especially want to go to Paris or Brussels. He decided that he wanted to go to Russia. And so he headed off to Russia, and there was a time period, I guess in between the semesters, that he had a week or two off where he could travel or do different things. And he decided to invite Emma to join him in Russia.
Who'd never been out of the United States.
She'd never been out of the United States, right, exactly. And so she joined him, and it was while they were in Russia that he proposed to her.
Oh.
And then he came back and he finished his senior year of college. And Donna already mentioned that they then were married. And went on to Fort Benning. Todd went to Ranger School, and then they were assigned to Fort Campbell. And Kylie was born. And I thought it was very special also, and it's something that really says something about both Todd and Emma. They of course wanted to have a vacation before he headed off to Afghanistan. And they chose to come right here. Now our family was living in Virginia at the time, and Todd and Emma were living at Fort Campbell, and but we had this condo here in Cocoa Beach, and this always felt like my home, our family's home. And so Todd said, "Well, Mom, we want to spend our vacation in Florida at the condo." So this is where Todd and Emma and Kylie spent their last days in the United States. And it was a wonderful time. And what was so special is that I remember at one point I thought, okay, I need to give these kids some time to themselves because Todd is headed overseas. And they said, "No, Mom, you don't need to leave. You need to stay right here and be with us, you know." But I did leave. I did go home back to Virginia at that time so they could have some time to themselves before he headed out. So they were here a couple of weeks, I think.
It was a great vacation. And you would keep Kylie while they could go and
yes, well, yeah,
fool
it
around
was
stuff.
right, exactly. Yes, I did have some wonderful times.
You went
with
to Key
Kylie.
West, had a great
we did.
time down
Yeah,
there.
we went to Key West, and snorkeling and scuba diving and jet skiing and all those fun things that Todd loved.
I would be very proud to be able to say, and so many of our friends who are Gold Star parents don't have this luxury, we maintain a good communication with Emma and Kylie. Kylie is half Todd, still walks around now, she's 7, be 8 in August. We met them in Guam a year and a half ago. We met them in Virginia last December. Try to keep as much contact. The reason she's in Guam, Emma is also a patriot. She married a soldier, and he had the ultimate sacrifice. She became a Gold Star wife, a widow of an Army hero. She, however, knew and read and followed Todd's recommendations when he prepared a letter to Emma. If you read this, I'm not coming home, which he prepared in Afghanistan on his computer. That letter has been shared on the internet and the Washington Post and other places because it gives strength to people. I'm not coming home, but I want you to have the kind of life you deserve, and I want Kylie to grow up with the kind of life she deserves, having a father and going there. No, I'll always be with you, but please go forward. Within 3 years, she married again to a Navy diver. When you think about dangerous military occupations, just being a diver is dangerous, never mind being in the military. So they now live in Guam. He knew Todd. He was a freshman when Todd was a senior at William and Mary. So he knew Todd and is big enough a man to keep Todd in their lives for the sake of Kylie and for the sake of Emma, who fell in love with 2 very special military guys. This bracelet that you may be wondering was actually made by Emma's father. It has Todd's name and the date he was killed on it. I've never not worn this any day since I got it in about October of 2010. Jeannie has the same thing.
Each member of the family
Was
has
given
one of
one.
these bracelets.
Oh.
He is the silversmith of Colonial Williamsburg. And that was his career and profession, a real artisan. And he is probably the top 4 or 5 silversmiths in the country. Routinely makes things for Queen Elizabeth and all kinds of royalty, commissioned through the Colonial Williamsburg, 1700 style program. But we are still in touch with her family. We want to be with them, in spirit at least, as Kylie grows up, and we're really honored to be able to be in that position. We owe it to Todd, we owe it to Kylie, and thank heavens Emma is strong enough a person to not want to turn the page and make her life simpler by not having 3 sets of grandparents to worry about. In fact, we're so proud, and if she ever listens to this, Emma, this is for you, with extensive love. She called us on the day their child was born in Guam, a brand new little boy. They called us and said, Jeannie, Don, you have your 10th grandchild. Not legally correct, but heartfelt, so we feel that way. Now,
It's very special.
Yeah, what we thought we would do is talk a little bit more. It's already been well over an hour, but talk a little bit more about what our life has been like after Todd was killed. Because as parents, you have choices, that your whole life changes. There'll always be a hole in our heart. We can't change anything about what happened, but we can decide what we can do to impact the legacy of Todd and all the fallen. And in different ways, always in teamwork, we and our children, our other children, have tried to do that. So we'd like to share with whoever looks at this story some of that by going around the house and telling stories about the different pictures and things that bring back memories of what we're doing.
Do that, and am I correct in that a number of these are paintings that you've done yourself? Is that correct?
All of them.
All of them are.
Have been published in a book by the
Oh.
College of William and Mary.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
So that's to know. These
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
these are
if you don't see a painting here that she didn't do,
okay.
I don't think.
Understand?
Well, what,
That's important for
can
the.
I
Yeah,
add a little
yeah.
bit about that, how that
Well,
happened?
yeah, if you want. go
Yeah,
ahead.
Sure.
yeah,
We're still
so,
on tape.
after Todd was killed, a couple of months after, not too long actually, our family got together and discussed what we could do to build a lasting legacy in his memory.
Sure.
And the one thing that came up right away is that we would like to create some kind of a scholarship in memory of Todd. And Emma came up with the idea that it would be good for it to be a study abroad scholarship, because when Todd from Iraq and went back to school, he bought a motorcycle. It was one of the first things that he did. He needed to have a motorcycle. In fact, I think he started the paperwork before he got back to the States. So he had this motorcycle, just like those Rolling Thunder guys who he had seen when he was 8 years old, right? So he, when he decided to do the study abroad program, on top of the tuition and everything else, he didn't quite have enough money. And though Mom and Dad were helping him a little bit, he didn't want to ask Mom and Dad for any more money. So he sold his motorcycle. So it was that reason, when Emma came up with that, that we decided that this would be a study abroad scholarship that we would build in his honor. And it was a grassroots effort. It took a year, but in a year's time, with donations from all over the country, and everything from buying a wristband for $3 to $1,000 contributions, a $50,000 endowed scholarship was named at the College of William and Mary. And each year, a scholarship is given out to a student who wants to study abroad. Yeah,
very nice.
it's pretty wonderful. So anyway, at that family meeting, as we call it, with our family gathered, and the kids were making all these decisions. They were actually running the meeting. After it was sort of at its end, I remember saying to them, well, what am I going to do? You know, I mean, they were going to do this, and they were going to do that, and there was going to be a ruck march. And what am I going to do? And they all sort of turned to me and said, well, Mom, you're going to paint. You know, because I did paint already, but my painting was very different than what it became. So 4 months later, I did begin to paint full-time. In a year's time, I created 21 oil paintings in honor and memory of Todd. Each painting was directed to me, was inspired by something that someone else had said about Todd.
Okay.
So in 1 year's time, I created 21 paintings in honoring and memory of Todd. And I didn't share them with anyone for about 8 months, I suppose. They were all kept down in my studio. Then I allowed the family to look at them. And then after the family looked at them, I talked to the Muscular Museum of Art at the College of William and Mary, and they wanted to exhibit them. They were exhibited for 2 months. And then I continued for the rest of that year to paint what then became what I knew was the final painting, and that was painting number 21. Since that time I've done others, but they're not part of the series. That is actually the series.
I have to say that Jeannie is too modest all the time, but when she displayed the paintings at the College of William and Mary, it was in the Student Union. More than 10,000 people, at least, saw those paintings in those 2 months. She had put a book out and asked for comments. How do you feel about seeing these paintings? The college had put up her little statements about each of the paintings to sort of explain. And the comments were moving. After she read the comments, she said, I have to do something more. People want to get help too from the loss of a child. And there were people there that had no connection to the military, you know, and so they would do that. So as a result, she wrote a book. And this is it, called Losing Todd, A Mother's Journey. And that book has been published by the College of William and Mary. Several thousand copies have been sold. It's on Amazon, but the purpose is not to sell the book as much as to share the story. All the proceeds go to the college, which can then print more copies to share more ways. And all the paintings and all the descriptions and many essays from 11 different people are in here, including the former Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, who was Secretary of Defense and is now the Chancellor of the College of William and Mary. He writes a moving essay in here where he walked the same ground as Todd in Williamsburg, Virginia, and in Afghanistan, and Iraq too, probably. But anyway, the bottom line is, Since he was killed, we have done the best we can in very different ways. And we'd like to spend a little while talking about that as we walk around. But first, one important thing we left out. Jeannie, you were home alone in the early morning hours of the 9th of September,
It was very early.
2010.
It was very early in the morning. Don had to go out of town, and he had left maybe 5:30 in the morning, so it was just dawn in September. And I had grabbed my cup of coffee, and I was headed to the study to write Todd an email, because I owed him an email. I'd been very busy doing other things, and I know for about 24 hours I'd owed him this email. So I was just headed to the study. In order to get there, I had to go through the foyer. And as I went to pass in the foyer, in the side lights of the door was a figure. I didn't know until a year later that the doorbell was broken. So it was just the figure there. It was a woman, captain, Army captain, and she could see me, and I was frozen. I could not move. I stood there, I have no idea how long it was. I'd say 30 seconds maybe longer. And Todd's life just filled my brain from the time he was born on. And then finally I was able to move, and I moved forward, and I opened the door, and it was the Army captain was there, and a chaplain. And they then informed me that Todd had been killed, and I told them they were wrong, that it wasn't possible, that I had just talked to him on the phone. Because in my mind, it was the night before that I just talked to him, so when they said Todd was killed last night, none of it made any sense to me. Somehow or another, they were able to get themselves into the house, and they did that. And they sat down in the living room with me, and more than once, they explained to me again that Todd had been killed. I really was not comprehending things very well, and I couldn't really understand what they were saying. And then finally I remember saying, has Emma been told? And they said, of course, they had told Emma first. So she had been awakened even earlier than I was having my coffee. And they had actually awakened her. She was pounding on the door. And another officer and chaplain at Fort Campbell had visited her and were with her. So I called her immediately, and we talked on the phone for maybe 5 minutes. And I remember telling her to be sure to get one of her friends to be with her, that she would need some help. And she told me that she would be going to Dover to accept Todd's body back into the United States. And I couldn't even comprehend that. She asked me if she could come and be with us. And of course I said yes. You come and stay with us as long as you want, and that's what she did. So I hung up the phone, and the Army, I have to say we were so very fortunate, because they just had really good intuition, and they knew what to do, even though this was the very first time that the captain had done this. We were very fortunate. They became our good friends. They really did.
Where were you at this time?
We were in Hampton, Virginia,
mm-hmm.
and the Army captain was assigned to Fort Eustis in Newport News.
She was a helicopter company commander in the training squadron at Fort Eustis for the transportation command. So she's teaching helicopter pilots.
Yeah, right. So then I knew that I had to tell Don, and I knew that he wouldn't be home until probably late evening, and I couldn't accept that. So I knew I would have to call him by telephone. And so I did that. And and then he headed home immediately. At that point, I needed to be alone, and this is where the intuition really was amazing, because I asked them to leave. They kept asking me that things that I needed to sign, and I really couldn't understand what they were talking about. So I asked them to leave, and they left, and I walked into the kitchen and I collapsed. And then soon after that, the phone rang, and it was my daughter, Christina, and she said, "Mom, are you okay?" And another bit of intuition. And so I had to, how horrible to have to tell your children by phone. But I did, I told her, and then she said that she would tell her brother and sister, she would take care of that, and they would all be home soon.
They all lived in Virginia at that point. We were very fortunate. There were 4 years in our lives in the 2000s where we had 4 kids on 4 different continents. But in that particular time, Todd was the only one away in Afghanistan. The rest lived in Virginia. But all were, you know, more than an hour, 2 hours away when Jeannie had to face this story alone.
And it took a while, but by the afternoon, everyone was home. By the late afternoon, everyone was there, except for Emma, who would meet us at Dover. And so then we made preparations for ourselves to go. Well, the Army, Captain Hines and the chaplain did come back, and they came back. Was it just before or after you got home? They just before, I think.
I think it was just after. I think they were staking out the place because they knew I was coming. When they saw my car pull up, they dove in. Because they were under pressure to make sure the notification is official. Until you sign that, it's not official. There's all kinds of rules. But
one of the first things you need to sign is whether or not you want to make the death of this person public. And they really need that information right away, because whether or not, is it, and what are you to do? And a lot of people say no. And we didn't do that. We said yes, because Todd was a hero and people needed to know what he gave.
And we made that decision, though, long before we knew how he was killed. It took us a long time to get that full story. We suspected that it would be a courageous effort, but we didn't know for sure. But I think Todd was like most American soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, Coast Guard guys who go. If they go into combat and they know it could happen, even if something bad happens, like a tragic accident, they still are at the same level of risk. And so their stories deserve to be told. And we knew...
Oh, we didn't know the details, but we did know
basically
what had happened.
Yeah, we knew he was killed. He didn't shoot himself or whatever. We're trying to leave all that stuff out. But the point is, I think the feeling was that this was our chance, our first huge decision, as Jeannie points out, whether to be open about this. And as it turned out, from that I would think I was back around 10:30 or so.